The recording has started, and this is the January 7th, 2020 Crossplane community meeting, the first one of the new year here. So I hope everyone had some good time off for the holidays, and we are all ready to get back on it here again in 2020. So let's actually go ahead and talk about this first, because that will be first in the chronologically speaking. So we are planning to run a patch release for the stack GCP stack there. And Dan, do you want to go ahead and talk about the issue since you put the fix in for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a community member realize that they were unable to connect to a GKE cluster using our new V1 Beta 1 API using the connection secret. So the issue there is that when you provision a GKE cluster, the service account role that you have basically doesn't have admin rights in the cluster. So you have to turn on basic authentication to get admin rights, which we want to be able to do as we provision Kubernetes applications into that cluster using it as a target. So basically what we need to do is re-enable the basic authentication. So have the username and password in the kube config that's generated. So the issue with that is we don't have a story right now for creating a cluster with basically existing credentials because there's actually, I think, a issue open for this. We're considering how we want to provide kind of like secretive information to a configuration. So what we're doing right now is we are allowing the specification of a username, then relying on GCP to generate that password and propagate that back in the kube config. And then you can obviously just use that to connect to the cluster. So it is somewhat declarative in the credentials we're using. So long story short, if you specify basic auth, then you can automatically connect to the cluster. Otherwise, you would need to go through provisioning a GKE cluster and then actually connecting to it through GKE and setting up a service account for Crossplane then to use for scheduling. But it was nice that we got this issue opened on the Stack GCP repo, and we had the fix merged in 14 hours. So that was cool to be able to get that fixed quickly. And I'm excited to have that in the patch release coming out today.
Yeah, it's good to get a fix out for this, in a patch, and so that it'll be available for the community with a pretty quick turnaround. And it sounds like there's more to think about long term in terms of how we want to manage user accounts for GKE clusters that we provision, and what's the full story there. But we can get into that. All right, sweet. So we will get that patch release out, I think probably today, since everything is merged into the release branch. So it'll be pretty simple process of tagging and publishing, so it shouldn't be too hard. For zero, so we are, the next release, the monthly release is 0.7. We had 0.6 right before the holidays in December there. So we continue to get out, a monthly release of core Crossplane, the Crossplane runtime, all the stacks that the Crossplane maintainers are developing and maintaining right now. So that continues to go well in terms of a good cadence, a monthly cadence of getting features out. The next middle of the month time frame for release would be the end of next week on Friday the 17th. And we can consider a feature freeze a couple of days before that. But that seems well aligned with some of the features and bug fixes and work that we're planning in the next 2 weeks here. So that's at least a proposed date right now to do our 0.7 release. The roadmap is our roadmap it needs to be updated to include 0.7 features on it as well. So we'll follow up on that. Is Phil's online right now. Phil, is that something that you would mind updating?
Yeah,
for
totally.
us?
I'll get a PR for that.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Phil.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, so we'll get that roadmap updated there. let me know if anybody has any major concerns about the proposed date for end of next week. I think that shouldn't be I mean, there could be discussion about what day to do it, but it shouldn't be, the general idea should not be too wild and crazy, since this will be like the fourth monthly release around the middle of the month that we've done in a row here. So this cadence is pretty expected by now, and we'll continue doing so. All right, let me accept Mofik's suggestions here. Oops. Or worry about that later. Okay, so that's it for just the upcoming releases and milestones that I know of. We do not have any known patches or patch releases for main Crossplane or for any of the other stacks like AWS or Azure. So these are the only releases over the next 2 weeks that I am aware of, at least. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the community topics section here. Mawfik, do you want to talk through your easy minimal stacks there that you added to the agenda?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the right headline to put under, but like I actually wanted to ask like whether we want to include these easy stacks in our documentation, like quick start guides and stuff. Like they make it easier to just get up and running with Crossplane, and we will move the repositories to Crossplane.io GitHub organization. So
yeah, and I saw that I should have the rights now, I believe, on the source repositories to move those into the Crossplane org now. So thank you for doing that, Mawfik. Yeah, and I definitely think that it is a good idea to have user-facing documentation like our user guides or quick starts to be able to take advantage of these, easy, minimal, streamlined experiences here from these stacks you've created. I think like I'm starting to think about it in sort of how like there's I think Kelsey Hightower does like a Kubernetes the hard way repository and walkthroughs and guides and stuff. I think it might be almost interesting now to think about a similar approach here for Crossplane, where if we boil down the experience, at least a very streamlined experience, to just installing a couple stacks and then creating a CRD that represents your config, and then everything else starts being taken care of for you pretty automatically, and there's less manual steps, then that would be like a nice quick start, in the true definition of the term, of a way to get started quickly. And then there's could be like not necessarily call it Crossplane the hard way, but a more in-depth guide that kind of walks you through under the covers what's happening, what are the resources, what are the concepts, all that sort of stuff that's a little bit more detailed, and a deeper walkthrough. So we can balance on having a super easy and streamlined get off the ground experience versus, you want to learn a little bit more and become more educated, then take these longer steps.
Yeah, totally. And maybe even adding like an alternate quick start or incorporate it somehow into the quick start, so it's just a little bit faster. Both of those would be good ways to tackle that. Then we also have some work coming in to kind of get that stuff ported over to template stacks. And so in terms of documenting it, probably from like a end user perspective, that would be totally cool. And then from kind of like the forking and customizing experience, maybe adding that in like once we get to the template stack stuff.
That's a good point, Phil. Cool. But yeah, that would be awesome, Mawfik, overall, to get guides or some walkthrough readmes about how to use the easier minimal stacks there. I think that would be awesome. And then pipeline CI/CD pipelines, I can help you out with that as well. Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely excited about that effort there, how it came together over the holidays or before the holidays, just because of how it streamlines and makes the process of getting going with Crossplane all the more easy. So I like that a lot. Great work on that, Mawfik.
Maybe a little bike shedding, but are we going to call those stack dash something dash GCP? What is the thinking there?
Yeah, we're kind of moving away from the resource packs terminology and towards something like easy stack or config stack or something like that.
Yeah, Marcus, I think what you're getting at is like the name of the repo, itself. Like I was actually there, and I opened up the dialog to start moving them to the Crossplane repo yesterday, organization yesterday. I was like, how does this fit in our naming scheme? And it might be, from a repository sorting and searching perspective, it might be nice to, to adopt the same naming mechanism or naming convention that we already have of like stack dash GCP. So it could be maybe stack dash GCP dash minimal or something like that, or
Yeah, that's a great idea.
something so that you sort them and they're
Right.
right next to each other, as opposed to far apart from each other in the default list or whatever when you go to GitHub. So that's something I was thinking about too.
One thing about that is the minimal GCP, does it actually, it just brings kind of like default config, right? It doesn't actually, does it install a stack that runs things? Like, does it install stack GCP, or does that?
Yeah, that's a manual prerequisite now, since we don't have dependency resolution. Right. But with dependency resolution, it would bring in the upstream, the stack GCP automatically.
Gotcha. Okay.
It itself is a stack that gets installed, has a controller, or has a reconciler that's taking a CRD from a user and outputting artifacts from it. So it is a stack with a body, at least in that sense.
Awesome.
All right. If there aren't any other community topics or questions here, we can move ahead to pull requests. And Dan, would you like to briefly bring up some of these pull requests, and especially in the context of what your expectations are or what you need from the community for these?
Yeah, so most of these are not requiring any sort of work from anyone else. I just want to mention them. You can see actually one of them's already merged here.
Hooray.
So
we did it.
These are all in service of our new strategy for scheduling Kubernetes applications. So essentially what we want to enable is any Kubernetes cluster that we can get access to through a kubeconfig. We want to be able to schedule Kubernetes applications to them. So that enables things like scheduling to on-prem clusters within the same cluster that is the Crossplane control cluster and that sort of thing. To do that, we need to do some modifications to how the Kubernetes application scheduler works. And they're very light modifications. But we want a consistent scheduling process. So we also need to slightly modify how Kubernetes clusters that are able to be scheduled to right now, so cross-plane provision Kubernetes clusters, whether it be GKE, EKS, AKS, et cetera, how they basically expose the ability to be scheduled to. So the main ways this happens is the first one we saw there was the secret reconciler. So we now have the ability to schedule from multiple namespaces to one Kubernetes cluster. So our secret reconciler basically just says there's two secrets that are both consented to propagation. And one of them is the from secret, one of them is the to secret. So the from secret may be in a namespace, frequently cross-plane system, so something that's created by a managed resource. And then the to secret may be in an application team-specific namespace. And essentially what this PR allows us to do is have multiple secrets that are propagated from the same from secret. So that just involved modifying the annotations we put on secrets to allow multiple, on the from secret, multiple to secret, which includes their UID, name, and namespace, and that sort of thing. So now we can have that multiple propagation with this secret reconciler. The next piece of that is actually creating the Kubernetes target resource. So what this is, it's almost similar to how a provider works, in that it is just a resource that points to a secret that has connection information for a Kubernetes cluster. What we want to do is, if you are dynamically provisioning Kubernetes clusters in the traditional way on Crossplane that is already enabled, we don't want you to have to go through the extra step of creating a Kubernetes target just because you want to be able to schedule to it. So part of this involves creating an automatic Kubernetes target creation controller, which basically says, if you claim a Kubernetes managed resource, so that's once again frequently GKE, EKS, AKS, we're going to automatically create a Kubernetes target in the namespace of that claim, so you can go ahead and schedule to it. So if you have claiming ability in your namespace, then you don't have to go through any extra steps. If you don't,
sorry, Dan, is that when a claim generates in a dynamic? Is that when a claim results in a dynamically provisioned Kubernetes cluster, and when a claim results in getting matched to an existing Kubernetes cluster? So it's both like static and dynamic provisioning. That will end up a Kubernetes target in the namespace of the claim.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So the reason we're doing that is essentially you can only claim a resource once, right? Once it's bound to a claim, then you can't do that again. So right now, that's the method for propagating a secret to a namespace. So the Kubernetes target allows multiple namespaces to utilize the same cluster. So if you have like a sandbox cluster or something like that, it may be useful to have developers in multiple namespaces using that. So if you claimed that from a namespace, the Kubernetes target would be automatically created. If you wanted to consume that same cluster in other namespaces, then you just create a Kubernetes target that reference that cluster. So that's another key distinction. I mentioned that you can bring any cluster that you have a kube config for and connect to it. So if that was an on-prem cluster, something that's not currently reflected as a managed resource in Crossplane, then you could just create a secret directly with that kube config and then create a Kubernetes target that references it, and you'd be good to go. The other scenario is that you have a Kubernetes cluster that's already been claimed and you want to consume that from other namespaces. We actually have a cluster ref field, which is a Kubernetes object reference on the Kubernetes target that allows you to actually just point to a cluster, and it will propagate that secret for you, set the connection secret reference, and then you can begin scheduling there. So you have to imagine that in addition to this automatic creation controller, we also have to implement a target reconciler for each stack that provides a managed Kubernetes offering for when you reference a cluster directly. Basically, we need to have a controller in each of the stacks that says, okay, I've been referenced by a Kubernetes target. I need to find the connection information for that and propagate it to the namespace of the Kubernetes target. So that is what this PR is doing here. So you'll see the addition of a target reconciler here that can be implemented across the stacks with very little configuration. So these all kind of work in tandem, so they'll be landing at the same time. This will be enabled in 0.7, and there should be, if you're using the existing manner of consuming clusters, there should be very little churn for your perspective. But if you want to do these advanced things, then you'll now be able to.
And Dave, does this give us scheduling to bare metal clusters as well, like an on-prem scenario?
Yeah, exactly. So like I said, anything, if you have the connection information to talk to a cluster, then you can now schedule there, because the Kubernetes API is consistent whether you're using a managed service or you're running it on bare metal. If you're running it on Raspberry Pis in your apartment, you could still provision things from Crossplane to there. So we'll definitely have some cool demos coming up showing how you can use on-prem or self-managed Kubernetes.
Awesome, super cool.
One thing that makes me think about real quick is that this is another instance of the experience of of potentially wanting to import credentials or secret information into the Crossplane cluster, the control plane, as a secret. Mm-hmm. And you have to do that for your provider credentials, GCP or AWS, whatever. And then Kubernetes connection configuration information there, importing that as a secret too. And I'm wondering if there is some automation or experience that can be done to streamline that or improve that, because creating a secret with right fields and stuff like that can be, a little in copying and pasting and stuff like that. I wonder if that that could be a little error prone or a little bit tedious or manual or whatever. And I wonder if there's some streamlined automation or experience around there to get configuration or create secret configuration credentials into the control plane in a nice experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of that, and I think there's actually issues open for this on the CLI, where we want to be able to take even just a local config and inject that into a Crossplane cluster with the Kubernetes target. So basically, take this other cluster I can connect to and make it able to be scheduled to in Crossplane. So I think that would be really valuable. Another thing that has been requested by the community is kind of doing the reverse. We're saying like, okay, I provisioned this Kubernetes cluster with Crossplane, so I have the secret information. Let me pull that down to my local and connect to it directly. So it's almost like how you'd imagine, like in the past, people would want to connect to a VM that was provisioned for them using like SSH keys. It's kind of like a similar scenario to that if someone wants to get more insight into a cluster that they provisioned using Crossplane.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that as the sub scenarios, like maybe you have like your AWS, your .aws/config file locally of like, hey, just can you just grab the information out of that and create a secret for me?
For
More
sure.
automation, less manual steps. All right, so that's the topics that we had on the agenda here. Did anybody have further agenda items or topics they wanted to add before we adjourn for the week? Okay, sweet. All right, then we can go ahead and wrap up this community meeting here, and we will continue our normal frequency now after the holidays of every 2 weeks. So the next one would be the 21st, I think, 2 weeks from now. So yeah, we will go ahead and proceed with getting the GCP stack patch out and keep on working towards 0.7. which will be before the next community meeting, and then we will see everyone here online in 2 weeks.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good day.